Are we actually better off today than we were thousands of years ago? For hundreds of years, there's been a debate between two conceptions of the state. On the one hand, you have Rousseau, with his ideal of the noble savage, living in peace until civilization came along and corrupted his nature. And then of course you have Hobbes, who thought that before the rise of civilization, our lives were poor, nasty, brutish and short. Yet, no matter where you stand on this issue, you'll probably agree that compared to our ancestors, we enjoy a great deal of security and comfort. Much of our current prosperity wouldn't have been possible without the agricultural revolution, when we left behind our foraging ways and we learned to cultivate wheat and rice, and we began to come together in permanent settlements, usually along some riverbank somewhere. Because of this, we tend to think of the agricultural revolution as a major step towards our current standards of living. But historian Noah Yuval Harari has an alternative view. When we began to settle down, we traded a varied, balanced lifestyle with, well, effectively slavery. For instance, agrarian settlements led to much harder work for your average human being. The hunter-gatherers would only work whenever they needed to, whereas an average farmer would work anything from 50 hours a week upwards, for little or no profit, because settlements led to more complex societies, which in turn lead to more complex hierarchies, and hierarchies eventually lead to exploitation. So the whole reason for settling down, more food, led to a surplus that was produced by the farmers, but that surplus was actually being taken by your local warlord. The agricultural revolution also led to an increase in disease, because of course when more people are living together in cramped conditions, that's an ideal environment for viruses to spread. I like to think of Mel Gibson's movie Apocalypto. There's this initial part of the film which is set in the forest with this little tribe living a pretty idyllic lifestyle, and then they're moved to the city, and you can see how miles away from it the landscape has changed. The forest has been burned down. It's just desolation. It feels apocalyptic. And the closer they get to the city, the more it's disgusting. You see dead animals in the middle of the road, mud, blood, people coughing. It really helps convey this idea that in early times, cities were actually horrible places to live. Another byproduct of the agricultural revolution, ironically, is famine. Although we're working to create all this surplus, we became over-dependent on very few food sources like wheat, as opposed to our previous condition as hunter-gatherers, where if something dried up, we would just go and find a different source of food. We'd eat meat. If there was no meat, we'd eat fruits. If there were no fruits, we'd fish. We were far more versatile. But when you're over-dependent on a single source of food, you're at the mercy of climate, of drought, of a bad harvest, so that anything that adversely affects your major food source can cripple your economy. Another thing is, of course, in times of plenty, we'd have these bulging food stores, which would then encourage thievery, which then brought in the requirement for walls and armed guards, with all that entailed. And finally, a higher child mortality. Now that we didn't have to carry children around and they weren't such a burden, we didn't have to space them out every 4 or 5 years, but we could pop a kid out every year, which in turn led to higher competition for food sources. So this is a quote from Harari. Rather than heralding a new era of easy living, the agricultural revolution left farmers with lives generally more difficult and less satisfying than those of foragers. Hunter-gatherers spent their time in more stimulating and varied ways and were less in danger of starvation and disease. The agricultural revolution certainly enlarged the sum total of food at the disposal of humankind, but the extra food did not translate into a better diet or more leisure. Rather, it translated into population explosions and pampered elites. The average farmer worked harder than the average forager and got a worse diet in return. The agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud. Of course, there is another side to it, and Harari says that the agricultural revolution did offer us evolutionary success. The problem is that the currency of evolution, in his words, is the spreading of DNA, and the surplus of food certainly led to that population boom. But today we'd say an increase in population is probably not a good thing. In his own words, the legacy of the agricultural revolution was the ability to keep more people alive under worse conditions.